Hey, fifth graders. Miss Stumbo here, back for some more White Giraffe. So last read aloud, we left off at the end of chapter 3, where Martine had just arrived in South Africa. She was kind of stranded in the airport for a little bit. No one was there to pick her up. She was starting to really feel pretty nervous, as you can imagine. Thought her grandma forgot about her. And then Tendai, the really exuberant, excited man, comes to pick her up and told her that they got kind of delayed with a shipment of elephants that had just gotten to the game reserve. So he's really excited, full of life, and Martine's just kind of like, I'm a little nervous, a little shy still. So they are headed to meet her grandmother now. So let's pick up with chapter 4. Afterward, Martine would always remember her first journey to Sahubana, a name that Tendai explained was a Zulu greeting. He was from the Zulu tribe himself. They took the coastal road out of Cape Town, riding in his battered jeep, past a series of magical bays and inlets where the sea was navy blue against the clear sky. Some beaches were wild, with flying spray and forest growing almost to the shore. Some had rainbow beach huts and surfers riding the breakers on bright boards. Some had rocky colonies of penguins or seals, and all of them were overlooked by the mauve-gray cliffs of a flat-top mountain, which was called, for obvious reasons, Table Mountain. After about an hour, they turned inland, and Martine was amazed at how quickly the scenery changed from a heathery type of vegetation and became like the Africa she'd always seen in photographs. Pale, spiky thorn trees and ragged shrubs dotted the long yellow grass, which glowed beneath the blazing summer sun as if it was lit from underneath. The empty road stretched on forever. Martine rolled down her window in the hot cab, and the dusty animal shell of the bush poured into the jeep. Tendai talked about Sahubana along the way, describing his job as a tracker at the game reserve. Sahubana, it turned out, was not just a game reserve. It was a wildlife sanctuary, and it was Tendai's role to check on the progress of every animal in the park. About a quarter of the animals at Sahubana had been born there, but all the rest had been rescued. Some came from drought-stricken areas or game reserves or zoos that had gone out of business. Others had been brought to Sahubana with injuries or because they'd been orphaned in hunts or calls. In 20 years, Tendai said, I never saw Henry Thomas, your grandfather, turn a single animal away, not even one. This was the first mention there had been of her grandfather, and Martine pricked up her ears. But Tendai's next sentence caught her totally off guard. I'm so sorry, Miss Martine, that I wasn't there at his side, watching over him the night that he died. Martine's head was already spinning from jet lag and lack of food, and this news made it spin a little more. It was clear that it hadn't occurred to Tendai that she might not even know she had a grandfather, let alone that he had died. She said carefully, Would it be okay if you told me what happened? Tendai's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yibbo, he said. I can try. It turned out that nearly 2 years had passed since her grandfather's death, and yet the events surrounding it were still shrouded in mystery. The police theory was that Henry had stumbled upon a gang of poachers trying to steal a couple giraffes, or maybe kill them for trophies. It had happened on a weekend when Tendai was away in the north of the country visiting his relatives, a weekend when Sahubana was at its most vulnerable. There had been a struggle. When it was over, Henry had been fatally wounded, and the giraffes left for dead. There was no telephone in the village where I was staying, said Tendai, so I never knew that this terrible thing had happened until I returned on Monday. By then, it was much too late. In the summer, many Zulus asked the Rain Queen to bless their fields with rain, but that week it seemed she had been listening far too well. For 2 days, the storms had been washing away the tracks, and the police in their vehicles had been driving all over the grounds. By the third day when I came, there was no sign to be found. None of the hunters had ever been caught. To this day, nobody knew whether Henry had been murdered or just shot by accident in the struggle. Most puzzling of all was why the poachers had fled without the giraffes they had so obviously come for. Did the police manage to find any clues? Martine asked worriedly. It was sad to hear about her grandfather, but it was even more disturbing to know there were killers on the loose in the very place she was expected to make her new home. Those baboons. Don't worry, little one. Even the spider leaves a trail. It might take some years, but eventually we will find who did this. I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Maybe not. Ugh, my allergies. I don't know about any of you, but my allergies are kicking up. Maybe if we are patient enough, they will even find us. The Zulu's face had darkened during the conversation, and now he gave himself a little shake, as though remembering that he and Martine had only just met, and perhaps he was saying more than he should. He smiled his amazing smile. Your grandfather had a warrior's heart, he told her. He was the best game warden. Number one. Martine felt a pang for the grandfather she had never known. He sounded like a good man. The new game warden was a young man by the name of Alex Dupreez. There was something in the way that Tendai said his name that gave Martine the impression that Mr. Dupreez was not on Tendai's top 10 list of favorite people. They were passing a village of thatched huts and scattered houses with sunflowers and maize stalks in the yard. A group of African children were playing soccer in a field. The Jeep slowed and turned onto a driveway overhung by banana palms. At the end of it was a pale green house with a corrugated iron roof. A peeling Coca-Cola sign was propped against one wall. 3 chickens wandered out through the front door. Martine climbed out of the Jeep. Is this my grandmother's house? She asked, unable to hide her surprise. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it wasn't this. No, child. Tendai is just bringing you to see me. Martine turned around to see one of the fattest women she had ever encountered waddling toward her across the threadbare lawn. She was wearing a traditional African dress in the most brilliant colors, with a matching headscarf of banana yellow, Kalahari red, and lime green. I told him you would be hungry, the woman continued in a voice as warm as buttermilk. And see, I'm right. Look at you, child. You just skin and bone. Miss Martine, meet my aunt, Miss Grace, said Tendai with evident pride, the best cook in the world. They followed Grace into the little greenhouse. The smells coming from the kitchen were divine. She and Tendai made themselves comfortable on handmade wooden chairs in Grace's simple but spotless living room. There was a woven grass mat on the floor and an out-of-date calendar on the wall depicting a tropical island. In a matter of minutes, Grace emerged from the kitchen with 2 huge plates containing omelets made from fresh farm eggs and wild mushrooms, a heap of crispy bacon, and tomatoes fried with brown sugar. Martine felt as if she hadn't eaten in years, and she savored every mouthful in silence. By the time she had finished, she agreed with Tendai wholeheartedly. Grace was the best cook in the world. She turned to Grace to thank her and found the woman watching her intently. Child looks just like Veronica, Grace commented to Tendai. Martine jumped as if she had been scalded. You knew my mom? She cried. Aunt, shouted Tendai, leaping to his feet. I told you not to say anything. Quiet, boy, ordered Grace. There be too many secrets at Sahubana. The child has a right to know the truth. What truth? Demanded Martine. Miss Martine, said Tendai, I'm sorry. We must go now. But, please. Martine looked from one to the other, her head buzzing with questions that it was clear she was not going to be allowed to ask. Grudgingly, she followed Tendai out to the Jeep. Grace grabbed her arm. "Wait," she said. She put her hand on Martine's forehead, and Martine felt an electric current pass through her. Grace's eyes widened. "You have the gift, child," she whispered, just like the forefathers said. "What gift?" Martine whispered back. But Grace just shook her head. "Be very careful. The gift can be a blessing or a curse. Make your decisions wisely." Whew. Well, that was a lot to take in. I have lots of questions running through my head right now, as I'm sure Martine also does, with what is this gift she's talking about? Why did Tendai have that reaction when Grace brought up her mother? So many questions that I'm wondering about right now. So let's keep reading. Chapter 5. In the yard, Tendai had the engine running. As soon as Martine climbed into the Jeep, he put his foot on the accelerator, and they bounded over the potholed drive and onto the main road. Heat wavered like a watery mirage above the pavement. Tendai seemed agitated. "I'm sorry, Miss Martine. I shouldn't have taken you there. Perhaps you would be kind enough not to mention it to your grandmother." Martine barely heard him. Her forehead was still tingling from the pressure of Grace's hand, and her mind was rushing like an express train through her past. She was trying to remember something, anything, that would explain what just happened. "But what did Grace mean about my mom? Did she ever live at Sahubana?" "Please," begged Tendai. "Those things you must ask your grandmother." He drove on in silence for a few minutes before turning right onto a sandy road lined with a high wire fence. Arching over the entrance and supported by two white pillars was a black wooden sign etched with the words, "Sahubana Game Reserve." The Jeep stopped and Tendai pointed out of the window. "Can you see the buffalo?" Martine dragged herself reluctantly back to the present. She squinted into the sun, but could see nothing except an endless expanse of trees, dusty shrubs, and grass sprawling under an electric blue sky. On the horizon was a range of mauve mountains. A black eagle circled lazily overhead. "No," she sighed. "I can't." "Don't look through the brush," instructed Tendai. "Look into the brush." Martine did, and gradually the shrubs resolved themselves into the muscular black hides of around 30 buffalo. She could make out their curved horns and intense faces between the trees. Then she spotted the bull elephant. He was standing under an umbrella tree, his curved tusks and gray bulk almost completely camouflaged. Like the buffalo, he seemed as ancient as the land itself. But even from 300 yards away, his deadly power was apparent. Martine stared at him in awe. She was beginning to feel overwhelmed by all she had seen and heard since leaving the airport. "Wow," she said at last. "He's huge and so still. I've only ever seen wild animals on television. What else do you have here?" 12 other elephants," Tendai recited proudly, 8 ostriches, 150 springboks, 10 wildebeest, 18 kudus, 20 zebras, 6 lions, 4 leopards, 7 warthogs, a couple of troops of baboons, a few water bucks, and He stopped. "That's all." "And what? You were going to say something else." "It's nothing," Tendai said. "The local tribes believe that a white giraffe has come to Sahubana. The Africans have a legend which says that the child who can ride a white giraffe will have power over all the animals. But it is only a myth. We have had no giraffes, not even ordinary giraffes, at Sahubana for nearly 2 years now, but people keep coming to me to report that they've seen this white one. The tribesmen say that it's an albino giraffe, as white as a snow leopard. If it's true, that would make it one of the rarest animals in the world. There is no proof. I've never seen it, and I'm in the game reserve every day." Martine had an odd feeling of déjà vu, almost as if she'd had this conversation in another life. But do you believe it exists? She asked eagerly. Tendai shrugged. From time to time, I've seen tracks, but they always disappear. I follow them for a few hundred yards, and then they just vanish into thin air. So maybe it is true. The Zulu laughed. It is not always the one you follow who makes the tracks, little one. In the old times, some tribes would tie the hooves of animals to their feet to lead other hunters away from the herds. And your grandmother says that in the mountains of Asia, people have tried to fake the footprints of the abominable snowman. Maybe that is what's happening here. He grinned at Martine. If the white giraffe does exist, he said, it must be very shy. The gears clanked and they moved down off the road. When they reached a high iron gate, Tendai jumped out to open it. On the other side was a driveway lined with huge red and orange flowers, an immaculate lawn, and a white-painted thatched house. Nerves bit into Martine's stomach. In a few minutes, she would meet her grandmother for the first time. Would Gwen Thomas be glad to see her? Would she be kind? Would she, even though she hadn't really wanted her, learn to like Martine? And what if she didn't? What then? Lots of questions. Let's see how the first meeting goes. Chapter 6. The door of the thatched house opened and out stepped a tall, slender woman in her early 60s, wearing jeans and a short-sleeved khaki shirt with a symbol of a lion on the pocket. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail. Martine was still taking in the fact that her grandmother was dressed in denim when Gwen Thomas marched up to her and, without any introduction, took her face in both hands. Up close, Martine could see that her fair hair was streaked with white and that her chestnut brown skin was etched with a million creases. She looked at Martine with an expression that was impossible to read. "You're all grown up," was all she said. She turned to Tendai. "You're very late, my friend. You haven't been visiting that crazy old magic woman, have you?" Martine realized with a shock that she was referring to Grace. "We got lost, grandmother," she said quickly. "We were driving all over Cape Town. I've seen the whole city." In a flash, her grandmother turned on her. "In this house, we speak only when we are spoken to." She wheeled around abruptly and stalked back inside. Tendai followed her with Martine's suitcase. He didn't look at Martine as he passed. Martine walked after them, her heart thumping. A ginger cat sat washing itself on the front step. It regarded her curiously as she approached. "Oh boy, this is going to be fun," Martine muttered under her breath. But the ginger cat simply yawned, closed its eyes, and lay down in the sun to sleep. Tendai appeared at the door. "Your grandmother is waiting for you," he said. With Tendai gone, Martine felt more alone than ever. She stepped into the house and looked around. It was cool and peaceful inside, with polished stone floors and big, comfy, worn leather chairs. Another cat, this one black and white, was curled up on the lid of an old piano, and there were oil paintings of cheetahs and elephants on the walls. The bare beams and thatch gave the room a sense of space and calmness. Her grandmother emerged from the kitchen with a glass of milk and a plate of egg sandwiches. She motioned for Martine to take a seat at the dining table. Martine hated the egg sandwiches and was still full of Grace's delicious food, but she wasn't about to say so. She began picking at the drink. "I don't have fizzy drinks here," her grandmother said. "Don't believe in them." She stood at the head of the table like a lioness, her blue eyes locked on Martine as if in challenge. "Okay," Martine said warily. "The first things you need to know are the rules of my house. Please don't touch anything that doesn't belong to you, and that includes the piano. No running, no shouting, no cursing, no sweets. I don't have a television. I go into Cape Town twice a year, so there'll be no shopping for you. No fast food. We grow our own vegetables. You'll be expected to make your own bed and help out around here. I can't abide laziness. Any questions? Can I breathe? Martine asked cheekily. No answering back, her grandmother roared. Martine shrank into her chair. The egg sandwiches lay untouched. Give them to me, her grandmother said, snatching them up. I should have known that crazy old woman would be cooking for you. Well, you can eat them for dinner. I won't tolerate waste. So, I'm sure you can imagine that Martine is feeling very overwhelmed right now and probably a little bit nervous that her feelings about how her grandmother was going to be are kind of showing to be true. Her grandmother is not overly welcoming and seems like she has a lot of rules and is very strict. So, not very comforting to Martine, who's just arriving there. The rest of the day went downhill from there. Martine was dizzy and a bit tearful after the long flight and the adventures of the morning. But after she'd showered, her grandmother insisted on driving her to the tiny town nearby, a single street of shops known as Storm Crossing, to buy a school uniform and some brown lace-up shoes. At the clothing store, where she was fitted with 2 white shirts, 2 navy blue skirts, a windbreaker, a blazer that had a lynx cat with fur-tipped ears on the badge, and a gray tie, Martine discovered to her horror that she was expected to start school the very next day, without even the shortest break to adjust to her new surroundings. There'll be plenty of time for that, her grandmother told her. You've missed too much school already. As if that wasn't bad enough, at dinner, thankfully not the egg sandwiches, which weren't mentioned, Martine slipped on the polished floor as she carried her grandmother's favorite teapot back into the kitchen. It smashed to pieces. Oh, what was Veronica thinking? Her grandmother ranted. I knew this would happen. How can I be expected to look after a child? She refused to allow Martine to help clean up the mess. Martine just crept quietly upstairs to bed with tears running down her face. She felt utterly bereft. She was in deepest, darkest Africa with no parents and no friends, living with a grandmother who plainly couldn't stand the sight of her. Really, it couldn't get any worse. As far as Martine could tell, there was only one positive in her new life, and that was Sahubana itself. She was already falling in love with it. The sun had been setting over the game reserve when they returned from the shops, and a herd of springboks was moving in a dusty column down the waterhole in front of the house. Martine had managed to escape from her grandmother's clutches long enough to go down to the bottom of the garden and watch the springboks through the high game fence. She'd had to pinch herself several times. Yesterday, she'd woken up in a gray, gloomy England, and now, just a day later, she was sitting under a copper sky streaked with purple with the evening sun warm on her skin. The young springboks were bouncing around the shallows as if they had mini trampolines attached to their hooves, and the guinea fowl, which she'd earlier seen waddling along the roadside like plump, blue-speckled kings, were crying in the trees as they settled down to roost. Martine stretched out on the grass and let her nose fill with the heady smells of an African evening. Cooking fires, wild animals, herby grass, and nature in abundance. She'd never experienced anything quite like it. Her bedroom, too, was something a bit special. It was up in the attic with a window cut into the thatch. Although very tiny, it had plenty of character and charm. There was a bookcase crammed with books about animals and Africa against one wall, and a bed made with crisp white sheets, a patchwork quilt, and large soft pillows. But the best part was that it overlooked the waterhole, a brown dam surrounded by thorny bush. Tendai had told her that most of the reserve's wildlife gathered there at dawn or sunset. Now, however, it was nighttime. The mattress sank beneath Martine's weight. She dried her eyes on her sleeve and wondered if it was really true that her mum had lived at Sahubana. It cheered her to imagine that this might once have been Veronica's room. Veronica might have read these books or snuggled into this very quilt. But why on earth had she never told Martine about this place? So tired that she could barely put on her pajamas, Martine slid between the sheets, her head whirling with snapshots from the long day. The last thing she thought about before she went to sleep was the white giraffe. So that was quite the whirlwind of a first day in South Africa for Martine. Now we've gotten a little glimpse into the white giraffe and how that kind of connects here. And according to Tendai, it's just a myth, but we shall find out more. Have a great day, fifth graders. See you for the next read aloud.